All right, so now we're going to start transitioning into muscle tissue and talking about different kinds of muscle. But before I really want to get in depth talking about muscle, let's spend a little bit of time discussing just the general functions of muscle. Okay. Now, bear in mind when we're talking about these functions, I'm talking about all three separate classes of muscle tissue in the body. And remember, there are three classes of muscle. There's skeletal muscle, there's cardiac muscle, and there's smooth muscle. Okay, and in another video segment, I'll talk about the different histologic characteristics that you see between them. All right, so if you want to think of one major function that goes with muscle tissue, that's movement. Okay, muscle tissue is an excitable tissue that when when we say excitable, think of it as irritable. Remember membrane potential. I'll review that later on as well. But if you irritate muscle tissue, you're going to stimulate it to contract, okay? And when muscle tissue contracts, the fibers shorten, the fibers in the cells shorten. And when you have a bunch of layers of cells, piled on top of each other, shortening as one unit, okay, or as an overall unit, then that's going to make that tissue get shorter, all right? And as that tissue gets shorter, that's going to make movement occur. For example, if you're talking about a skeletal muscle, you're going to have a belly, and then a tendon on one side, a tendon on another, and when that belly shortens, when those fibers slide past each other, that's gonna, as that tissue shortens, you're gonna pull on that tendon, and as that tendon crosses a joint, that's gonna make a bone move. I mean, that's an example of how skeletal muscle moves. All right, cardiac muscle, the cells are gonna shorten, they're gonna contract or relax. I say cardiac, I meant smooth muscle, I'm sorry. With smooth muscle, the layers of cells are going to contract or relax, and that's going to make basically the diameter of a hollow tube change. If the tissue relaxes, it's going to dilate. If the tissue contracts, it's going to constrict. That's how we constrict the pupil of your eye, blood vessels, peristaltic movements of the GI tract, and then cardiac muscle, same thing. When the cardiac tissue contracts, it's going to make the size of the chambers of the heart get smaller, and you're going to move blood around. And then as it relaxes and gets bigger, it can refill with blood. Okay? So basically all three of these types of tissues, the different types of muscle tissue, are designed to contract for the purpose of movement. Okay? Whether we're talking about moving a limb, or changing the diameter of a hollow organ, or we're talking about changing the volume and pressures of the heart, we're moving blood around the body. Okay? So the main function of muscle is movement. Okay, stabilization. Okay, when we're talking about stabilization, I mean the main type of muscle you think about here is skeletal muscle. Okay, skeletal muscle, you have to remember, when you think of joints, you have lots of tendons crossing joints. You have lots of muscles just around joints in general. Okay, so the muscles that are the muscles and their tendons that surround the various areas of a joint does help to stabilize it, especially our synovial joints of the body. Because remember, synovial joints, yeah, they do have a lot of ligaments and cartilage, but they have that because they're highly unstable joints. That's why they have such higher ranges of motion compared to other joints of the body, because anatomically they're not stable. Okay, they're a lot more loose and free, than like a cartilaginous or a fibrous joint. All right. So as a result, we have a little bit of extra help from the muscular system, stabilizing, like the shoulder, with the sits muscle group, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and subscapularis. Okay, the tendons from those four muscles are really the main stabilizers of the glenohumeral joint, the shoulder. All right, so muscles help to stabilize. Whether the muscles are actually found, like the deltoids, are found covering the joint itself, or whether the tendons, like the sits muscle group or quadricep tendons or, hamstring tendons are crossing a joint, all right, they create stabilization. All right, posture. Posture is important, okay? Posture is important for, not just, as a little kid growing, so they, so little kid sits up straight and all that, but posture just makes life better. Posture makes life a lot more convenient. For example, while you're doing this, take a second to lean forward and try to take a very big, deep breath in. Okay, now stand up straight, and now do the same thing. You'll notice it was much easier to do that. Okay, it was much easier when you're standing up straight just to do something as trivial and simple as taking in a deep breath. Okay, now it's not something most of us think about, but picture someone with kyphosis, someone who has, osteoporosis, and the upper part of the vertebral column, is degenerating and leaning forward. And you see these individuals that have kyphosis where they have this downward hump, that arch, that arch back, the hump back, and they're like this for a long time. And obviously it starts out not that severe, but it can progress that far. Now think about the quality of life that someone has, when they're like this. When something as simple as, something that we take for granted as just breathing normally, it's more stress on them to be able to breathe now. It's a lot more difficult. Okay? Or picture, like when you go to a nursing home, and this is really a sad sight to see, but unfortunately you do see it a lot, where you see, people where their neck muscles are so weak, they can't even hold their head up. Try taking a deep breath in or eating or drinking like that. It's not that easy, okay? So that's why, for example, a gentleman named Dr. Wayne Westcott started going into nursing homes and working people's, just doing something as basic as doing an exercise physiologist who was doing neck exercises with elderly individuals just to do something as simple as holding their head up. Okay, think of just the quality of life think of how the quality of life of that individual just changed. Like I said, folks my age and folks our age, most of the listeners of these or viewers of these videos are going to be students or people that are out there working in the profession already that are helping people like this. These are things we take for granted. Okay, but posture is good. Okay, and posture is also important, as a growing child, so you don't have any bone abnormalities. Okay, so we use muscle tissue to maintain posture. All right, heat. Okay, muscle tissue is very metabolically active. All right, muscle burns a lot of calories, especially skeletal muscle. All right, cardiac muscle is very metabolically active. Smooth muscle is metabolically active as well. Okay, but a lot of our body heat is generated from the metabolism of skeletal muscle. Okay, now bear in mind that muscle is not a good insulator for heat, though. It's a good generator, but it's not good at insulating heat. Fat is a good insulator. Okay, fat is a very good insulator. All right, but like I said, bear in mind that muscle does help us. Think about it. When you get cold, why do you shiver? You shiver. When you're shivering, your arms and legs, and maybe your jaw, if you're really cold. Okay, and because you're rerouting, your autonomic nervous system is redirecting blood flow to your core organs to keep them warm. That means you're restricting blood flow to the arms and the legs, your extremities. So then, as a result, they rhythmically contract. They contract. Shivering, and as a result, you're increasing the metabolism of that muscle. And as you do that, you're releasing more heat. Okay, to keep yourself warm. Okay, so muscles do generate a lot of heat. Muscles, like I said, are very metabolically active tissues, and that's just an important reason why people need to exercise. Okay, especially females talk a lot about cellulite, developing body fat, in certain areas of their body as they get older. Okay, one of the best ways to combat that is through just basic weightlifting. The problem is when people hear weightlifting, they think, you're going to turn into some big, scary-looking buff human being. Okay, that's not the case. If you do, lighter weights, higher repetitions, you build up that lean muscle tissue. You're going to burn more fat even when you're not exercising, and you're going to generate more heat as well. Okay, so keep that in mind. All right, like I said, and I say that because you do hear a lot of people complaining about that, as taking on body fat as the age. And, don't be afraid of lifting weights. People get scared of doing that because they don't want to gain weight. Don't focus your energies and your efforts on weight. Focus it on body fat percentage. That's a better indicator of overall health than just weight alone. So keep that in mind. Okay, so muscle generates heat. All right, and protection. This is a very minimal function of muscle, but it is there. Okay, remember muscle tissue, like skeletal muscle especially, it covers a lot of our organs in the body. You have intercostal muscles covering your ribs. Okay, or I shouldn't say they're more in between the ribs. They're not covering the entire rib cage, but there are spaces in between your ribs, and they are filled by muscles. Okay, that's a protective barrier against it. That could be the difference between an object penetrating through the wall of the chest and hitting a lung. Okay, you've got your abdominal muscles and your low back muscles covering your abdominal viscera. Okay, just the physical presence of that muscle being there is protecting, all right, that is protecting those organs that are in that area. Okay, so these are the major functions of muscle. movement, stabilization, posture, heat, and protection. And bear in mind, there are three different histological classes of muscle: skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle.